My name is Adrian Cole. I am 45 years old, and I am a 4-star general in the United States Army. That's not where this story begins, but that's where it ends. Because before I was General Cole, before the medals, the deployments, the endless ceremonies, I was just Adrian, a daughter, a sister, a wife, and above all, a mother. They said I failed. My family, the people who once hugged me at graduations, who sent me letters when I was deployed overseas, who held my son when he was born, they turned on me faster than I could have imagined. And when they did, they didn't just try to break me, they tried to erase me, they fought to take my son away. Not because I was dangerous, not because I had done anything wrong, but because they thought they could. Because they thought my silence meant weakness. And for a time it did. I stood still while they whispered in courtrooms, while they twisted the truth into something ugly. I stood still while my own mother, a woman who once told me I could be anything, took the stand and said I was unfit to raise my own child. I can still hear her voice. Cold, sharp. She chose the army over her family. She's not maternal. I wonder how long she'd been waiting to say it. I wonder if she even believed it. But here's the thing about people like me. People who've walked through war zones, who've held the hands of soldiers as they drew their last breath. We learn how to wait. We learn how to be patient. And when the moment comes, we move. The day of the custody hearing, I didn't wear a black suit. I didn't come to play small. I came in full dress uniform, ribbons, medals, insignias, the weight of every sacrifice stitched into the fabric. And when I stepped through those courthouse doors, the judge stood. He stood. And in that instant, my family, those same people who said I failed, fell completely silent. The room didn't just shift. It broke. Because at that moment, they realized everything. They realized that while they were busy spinning lies, I had been living a truth they could never touch. They realized I wasn't the fragile woman they painted me to be. I was their equal. I was their superior. And I was done being quiet. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to point fingers. I just stood there, in the skin of everything they tried to deny. And for the first time in months, I saw fear in their eyes. Not the kind of fear that comes from anger, the kind that comes from shame. But let me be clear, this story isn't about revenge. Not really. This is a story about justice, about quiet strength, about what happens when you let the world tell your story for too long, and then one day you take the pen back. I know many of you watching have felt it too. The sting of betrayal, the weight of lies, and maybe like me, you've wondered if silence was the safer choice. I'm here to tell you silence doesn't protect you. Dignity does. And dignity sometimes wears 4 stars. So sit with me, let me take you back to the beginning. To the moment I first realized that sometimes your greatest battles don't happen on foreign soil. They happen right at home. When the morning of the hearing finally came, I remember waking up before dawn. Not because I was nervous, but because I knew this was the day I would stop letting them write my story. I dressed carefully. Each medal, each insignia, each ribbon I pinned to my uniform carried the weight of something I had survived, something I had built, something I had sacrificed. It wasn't just fabric. It was every sleepless night, every deployment, every promise I made to come home. By the time I reached the courthouse, the sky was still soft gray and breathless. I stepped out of the car alone, and the moment I pushed the doors open, everything slowed down. I could feel it. Every eye in the hallway turned, some with curiosity, some with quiet awe, but most with judgment. They didn't see Adrian Cole, the soldier who'd served her country for over 2 decades. They saw the headline, the gossip, the woman who must have done something terribly wrong to be standing in a family court alone. I carried that weight silently as I made my way down the hall. Each step echoed louder than the last. The click of my heels on the cold tile sounded like gunfire in my ears. I caught sight of Brian before he saw me. He was standing near the double doors with my mother and my sister, laughing, smirking. It was a casual cruelty, the kind people wear like second skin when they think they've already won. But when he looked up, when they all looked up, their faces shifted. I didn't need to say a word. The uniform spoke for me. There's something about military dress that demands attention not because of the power it represents, but because of the discipline it reflects. It says, I know who I am. I know what I've endured. And I don't need to explain myself to you. Brian's laughter died in his throat. My sister's eyes darted down to the floor. Even my mother, who once stood in a hospital room and held my hand as I gave birth to the very child they were trying to take, swallowed hard, her expression unreadable. I walked past them without a glance. The courtroom itself was colder than I remembered. Sterile walls, worn wooden benches, the dull hum of fluorescent lights above. I took my seat at the front alone. For a moment, the air felt too thin. I could hear my own heartbeat. And then I felt it, the eyes. Not just from the people sitting behind me, but from the court staff, the attorneys, even the judge's assistant. There's a unique kind of isolation that happens when you know every person in the room has heard half a story and made up the rest. The silence pressed in. I didn't fidget. I didn't shift in my seat. I let the quiet settle because I knew sometimes silence is not the absence of power. Sometimes it is the weight of it. I glanced toward the flag in the corner of the room, the American flag, motionless for a moment, then gently stirring in the faint breeze from the air vents above. That flag had been with me in every base, every battlefield, every return home. And somehow, standing in that courtroom, it felt just as foreign as it did familiar. I drew in a slow breath and let it go. No anger, no fear, only clarity. They thought they knew me, but they didn't. They only knew the version of me they had built in whispers and glances, the one they painted in half-truths and courtroom rumors. And as I sat there back straight, hands folded, medals glinting softly under the artificial lights, one thought settled into my chest like a quiet anchor. They think they know me, but they only know the shadow they created. I used to believe that the loudest betrayals came with shouting, with slamming doors and broken plates. But that's not how mine happened. It started with a soft knock and an envelope. I had just returned from Brussels NATO Joint Command. 48 hours without sleep, still in uniform, still wearing the weight of briefings and battlefield updates. I remember the house was quiet. Too quiet. The moment I saw the envelope on the doorstep, something inside me, something small, just stilled. I picked it up. My hands barely trembled. I'd held rifles steadier than this. But when I turned the envelope over and saw the handwriting Brian's, I knew. Before I even tore it open, I knew. The words were simple. Cold, legal, petition for dissolution of marriage, request for sole custody. I don't remember if I breathed. What I do remember is the sound of the front door closing behind me. A sound that until that moment had always meant safety. Home. Now it felt like the lock clicking shut on a cell. I stood there frozen in the entryway, still clutching that envelope, still wearing the boots I'd worn through muddy fields overseas. And I couldn't move. There's a strange kind of silence that comes when your world starts to crack. It's not the absence of noise. It's the absence of meaning. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the weight of the envelope to become unbearable. I sat on the edge of the couch, my fingers tracing the gold band on my left hand. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just turned the ring, slowly, over and over, until my thumb found the familiar groove where the skin had worn smooth. Then I slipped it off. I held it in my palm for a moment, just stared at it like it belonged to someone else. Then I placed it on the coffee table right next to a photo of Noah, the one where he's grinning with 2 missing front teeth, arms wrapped around my neck, hair windblown from the park. I kept looking at that photo, and something inside me just broke. Not all at once, not in a way you'd see, but quietly, precisely, like the first hairline crack in a dam. I've walked through war zones. I've seen cities in rubble, but nothing prepares you for the battlefield inside your own home. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd fought for my country. I'd led convoys through hostile fire. I'd buried friends with flags folded tightly in trembling hands. And yet, the battlefield that unraveled me was a living room lit by the soft glow of a forgotten lamp. I stood eventually. I don't even remember how. I walked to the door, placed my hand on the knob, and for just a second, I hesitated. Because I knew that whatever was on the other side of that door, whatever version of life waited beyond this moment, I could never come back to this exact place again. Not really. Some doors once closed don't open the same way. Some thresholds once crossed change the shape of who you are. I opened it anyway. The door clicked shut behind me with a soft thud. And in that sound, something final settled deep in my chest. Later that night, I would take off my uniform. I would lay it carefully over the back of a chair. I would take the photo of Noah from the mantel and place it inside my travel bag. I would leave the ring where I'd set it. I never touched it again. And as I lay awake listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan, tracing the empty circle on my finger, I whispered words I wasn't sure I believed yet. Some doors, once they close, you don't go back through them. Not because you can't, but because you shouldn't. People ask me sometimes, how does a marriage fall apart? Is it sudden? Is it explosive? I wish I could say yes. I wish I could point to one moment, one argument, one betrayal that shattered it all. But the truth is quieter. It happens in the small things, the things you don't even notice until you're already too far gone. Brian and I, we weren't always like this. There was a time when he made me laugh, when we stayed up late watching old movies, when he held my hand in grocery stores just because. But somewhere between deployments and promotions, between endless flights and welcome home ceremonies, the distance crept in, not the kind of distance you can measure in miles, the kind you can feel even when you're sitting across the same table. I remember the last dinner we ever had as a family, not the court filings, not the shouting, just dinner. It was a Tuesday, nothing special, the kind of night that should have been forgettable. I had come home early, a rare thing. Noah was already at the table, legs swinging, a goofy grin plastered on his face as he tried to balance a spoon on his nose. He laughed. That deep belly laugh kids have when the world is still simple. I should have joined him. I should have laughed too. But instead I remember sitting there, watching, distant, disconnected. It was like I could see myself from the outside, like a stranger in my own home. Brian noticed. I know he did. But he didn't say anything. He just kept cutting his steak, eyes flicking up every now and then, not with anger, but with something worse, indifference. That's how marriages die, not in fire, in ice. I don't remember what we talked about that night. Probably something about Noah's school, the weather, maybe one of his soccer games. I only remember the sound of Noah's giggle and how somehow it felt far away, like I was underwater hearing it through glass. I wanted to reach for it. I wanted to snap back into the moment, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded at the right times. I smiled when I was supposed to. And all the while, something inside me kept whispering, this isn't right. This isn't real. The mask was already cracking. We just hadn't admitted it yet. Later that night, after Noah had gone to bed, Brian and I sat on opposite ends of the couch. The television was on, but neither of us was really watching. The space between us wasn't measured in feet. It was measured in years. Years of missed birthdays, missed dinners, conversations that never happened because we were always too tired, too distracted, too far apart. I looked at him, really looked, and for a brief second, I saw it. The resentment, the loneliness, the weight of everything we'd both stopped saying. And I realized I didn't know who he was anymore, and worse, I wasn't sure he knew who I was either. People think the worst thing you can feel in a marriage is anger. It's not. It's detachment. The quiet realization that you could disappear from the room and nothing would change. That's when I knew the cracks had already split wide open. I still wore the uniform. I still kept the schedules, the routines, the polite smiles. But inside, something essential was already gone. I see it so clearly now. The dinner table, the half-empty wine glasses. Noah's laughter so pure, so untouched by the fracture he couldn't yet see. I don't even remember what I cooked that night. But I remember the sound of the knife against the plate, the flicker of candlelight on Brian's face, the way he said goodnight without looking me in the eye. We never spoke of it. We just let the silence grow. I think some part of me believed we could fix it. That maybe one more homecoming, one more vacation, one more carefully planned anniversary dinner would glue the pieces back together. But I was wrong. We both were. Some cracks can't be sealed. Some masks, once broken, never fit the same way again. There's a certain kind of betrayal that cuts deeper than any enemy's blade. The kind that doesn't come from strangers. The kind that comes from the people who are supposed to know you best. Blood. I never thought I'd be standing in a courtroom with my own mother sitting on the other side. But I was. And when her eyes met mine, I knew before she even opened her mouth. She wasn't here for me. She was here for him. The first time I saw her take Brian's side, it wasn't in a courtroom. It was in my own living room. The same house where she used to rock Noah to sleep when I was deployed. The same house where she helped me decorate a nursery. Folded tiny socks kissed my forehead when I left for basic training. I opened the door, and there she was. Not alone. My sister was with her. I remember the way my mother's hands were folded neatly in front of her. The way her lips pressed together so tightly they'd turned white. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Brian stood off to the side, arms crossed, wearing that same smug half-smile he always did when he thought he'd already won. I should have known. I should have seen it coming. But no matter how many battles you fought, nothing prepares you for the battlefield that is family. My sister spoke first. Something about doing what's best for Noah. Something about concerns they had. I barely heard her. All I could focus on was my mother's silence. The woman who taught me how to tie my shoes. The woman who told me I could be anything even when the world said I couldn't. The woman who held my hand when I cried after my first heartbreak. She just stood there and said nothing. I asked her quietly, carefully, how she could believe this, how she could stand there and let them paint me as something I wasn't. And she looked at me. For the first time, she really looked at me. And she said, "Maybe it's time you put family first for once." That's when something inside me shifted. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her, make her see that I was fighting for my family. That everything I had done, every tour, every medal, every sacrifice had been for them. For Noah. For the life I was building. But I didn't scream. I didn't even raise my voice. I just stood there, frozen, listening to the sound of my own heart breaking. Because you expect enemies to betray you. You expect the world to be harsh. But you never expect it from the woman who once wiped tears from your face and called you her brave little girl. It wasn't the words that hurt most. It was the ease with which she spoke them. Like she'd been waiting for this moment. Like somewhere deep down she'd always believed I'd fail. My sister couldn't meet my gaze either. She kept her eyes on the carpet, arms folded tight, as if she could fold herself right out of the confrontation. I saw it then, saw it so clearly I almost laughed. This wasn't about Noah. Not really. It was about control. About years of quiet resentments, of whispered judgments behind closed doors, of disappointment they never spoke aloud but carried like heavy stones between us. And I realized I had spent my entire life proving them wrong. Proving I was strong enough, brave enough, worthy enough. But in the end, none of it mattered. Because some people don't want to see you rise. Some people need you small so they can stay big. The conversation ended not with shouting, but with distance. With my mother turning away. With my sister following behind her. The door clicked shut behind them. And there it was again. The sound of a door closing. Another threshold I couldn't uncross. I remember standing there long after they left, my hands still trembling, my breath shallow. I looked down at the picture of Noah on the mantel, his gap-toothed grin, his eyes so full of life. And I whispered to myself, not even realizing I'd said it aloud sometimes. The deepest wounds come from the people who were supposed to protect you. There's a moment when the story stops belonging to you. When your life, your name, your choices become headlines. And no matter how hard you try, you can't take it back. That moment came faster than I expected. It started with whispers, and then the noise. The tabloids loved it, of course. Decorated general in custody battle shocker. Can a soldier be a mother too tough to nurture? I didn't recognize myself in any of it. They printed photos of me in uniform, solemn sharp medals gleaming under foreign skies. They pulled quotes from interviews I barely remembered giving, twisted every word, painted me as cold, rigid, unfeeling. And maybe part of me gave them the brush to paint with. I used to believe that silence was strength. That dignity meant not fighting every battle thrown your way. That if you held your head high and let the noise pass, eventually, the truth would rise on its own. But the truth doesn't rise when you leave it buried. It rots. The more I stayed silent, the more the story grew without me. I remember walking into a coffee shop one morning, weeks after the first articles hit. Eyes followed me. Some whispered. One woman, someone I used to know from Noah's school, glanced up, met my gaze, and then quickly looked away like I was contagious. I didn't say a word. I just left the coffee on the counter and walked back to my car. And that's when I saw it. my own reflection in the rearview mirror. For a second, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Tired eyes, tight jaw, shoulders too straight, too rigid, like the weight of the world had fused into my bones. I looked like the person they said I was, cold, distant, a machine in a uniform. I sat there for a long time, engine running, heart numb, and I realized something that chilled me more than any headline could. The enemy wasn't just out there. The enemy was in here. Me. I had built the wall, brick by brick, deployment after deployment. I had armored myself so well that even the people I loved couldn't find a way in anymore. And in the absence of my voice, the world created its own version of me, a version I barely recognized. Unreliable narrator. That's what they call it in books, isn't it? The voice telling the story isn't always the voice you can trust. And maybe I wasn't as reliable as I thought. I told myself I was doing this for Noah, that staying calm, composed, unshaken was the right way. But whose comfort was I really protecting? Mine, theirs? Or the fragile idea of who I thought I was supposed to be? The truth haunted me. I had let them build a version of me that I hadn't fought back against. And in doing so, I was slowly becoming it. I remember looking down at my hands on the steering wheel, steady, calloused, familiar, and feeling foreign. I whispered to myself, barely audible, "Who are you?" The answer didn't come. Because I didn't know. Not fully. Not yet. I thought about Noah, his laughter, his tiny hands gripping mine when he was just learning to walk. I thought about the way he used to call me Mama Bear, the way he'd run to the door when I came home. Had I become so wrapped up in survival that I forgot how to live? Had I worn the armor for so long that I forgot how to take it off? That day something shifted in me. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't even know how to fix it. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: silence wasn't going to save me. It was killing me. I couldn't afford to be quiet anymore. Not for me. Not for Noah. And as I sat there watching the reflection of a woman I barely knew, I made a silent promise I would find my voice again, before the world took it completely. For most of my life, I believed that family meant safety. Family meant loyalty. Family meant love. I was wrong. I learned that lesson late, too late to stop the damage, but just in time to see the truth. It didn't happen in a single moment. It was quiet, it was subtle. The kind of realization that creeps in slow, like the tide pulling away beneath your feet. The first cracks appeared the day I overheard my sister on the phone. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I had stopped by my mother's house, unannounced, unplanned. Some part of me still hoped we could salvage what was left. I stood in the hallway frozen as her voice drifted down the stairs. "I don't have a choice. I'm drowning. The debts. I can't. If I testify," he said he'd help clear it. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Because for one terrifying second, I couldn't make sense of what I was hearing. It was my sister, the same sister who used to braid my hair when we were little girls. The same sister who cried when I left for my first deployment, now selling pieces of me to save herself. I stepped back before she saw me. I left without a word. But something had already shifted. The next day it was my mother. We sat in her living room, two women who once shared everything, now sitting worlds apart on the same floral couch. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, twisting the corner of a handkerchief that had frayed with time. I asked her, directly, "Why are you doing this?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Because Brian, he makes sense. He listens." I felt the words hit before I even processed them. Brian, the man who betrayed me, the man who sought to erase me. He made sense to her. She looked up then, her eyes glassy but hard. "All those years, Adrian, you were gone. You chose the army. You chose missions, medals, everything but us." It was like hearing a stranger. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream that I fought for more than medals, that every mile I spent away was for something larger than myself. But in that moment, I saw it. This wasn't about the custody battle. This wasn't even about Noah. This was years of silent resentment poured into a single decision. A lifetime of swallowed disappointment finding a place to land. And in the middle of it, I saw something else. Something smaller, something broken. Fear of being alone. Fear of losing control. Fear of becoming irrelevant. Brian, he had offered them something I never had certainty. Control. The illusion of safety. My sister had debts she couldn't pay without help. My mother had fears she couldn't face without blame. And I was the easy target. For the first time, I stopped seeing them as villains. I saw them as people, flawed, desperate, weak in ways I had never allowed myself to be. But it didn't make the betrayal hurt less. If anything, it made it sharper. I left her house that day without looking back. But her words stayed with me. All those years, you were gone. Like I'd abandoned them. Like I'd chosen war over love. I sat in my car, hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. I thought of Noah. I thought of every letter I had written from bases in the desert. Every birthday I had tried to call in for. Every medal they saw but never understood. And for the first time, I said it out loud. Family doesn't always mean love. It felt foreign on my tongue. But it was true. Sometimes, family means control. Family means manipulation. Family means keeping you small so they can feel big. I think I had always known. I just wasn't ready to see it until it was too late. That night, I found an old photo tucked in the back of my closet. My mother, my sister, and me, arms wrapped around each other. Faces lit with the kind of joy that only lives in memories. I held it for a long time. But when I finally set it down, I didn't cry. Some stories, no matter how beautiful their beginnings, are meant to end. There's something about a broken mirror. It doesn't just reflect what's in front of it. It fractures it, distorts it, turns familiar faces into strangers. That's how I felt when I looked at my life. Like I was standing in front of shattered glass, seeing everything I thought I knew, split into pieces I couldn't put back together. I remember standing in my bedroom that night, staring into the mirror above my dresser. The overhead light caught on a hairline crack in the corner, one I hadn't noticed before. I couldn't stop staring at it. That thin, jagged line slicing through the reflection like a scar. It felt right, honest somehow, because that's what I was now. Fractured. The trust I'd held in my family gone. The faith I'd placed in the idea of home gone. Even the person I thought I was gone. For a moment, I let myself feel it. The weight of it. The ache that pressed behind my ribs, quiet but unrelenting. But only for a moment. Because there comes a time when you have to stop bleeding. When you have to gather what's left and move. Not with anger, not with noise, but with deliberate, measured action. That's what the army taught me. That's what war taught me. You don't win by screaming. You win by planning. And so, I began. Not with rage, but with silence. The right kind of silence. The kind that doesn't hide. The kind that watches, learns, prepares. I started with the facts. I requested every court document, every filing, every transcript. I reviewed the custody claims line by line, highlighting every falsehood, every manipulated statement, every lie dressed up as concern. I met with my attorney. I hired an independent evaluator. I contacted former commanders' colleagues. Even soldiers I'd once mentored, people who knew me beyond the uniform, beyond the battlefield. Character witnesses. Not because I needed validation, but because I needed to control the narrative before it controlled me again. Every night after Noah had gone to sleep, those rare nights, I still had him. I sat at the dining table with stacks of papers spread before me. Legal pads, yellow highlighters, and that mirror, the one with the crack, always within view. It became a symbol, a reminder. You don't need to be whole to be strong. Sometimes the strongest things are the ones held together by choice, not perfection. Brian's side wasn't prepared for that. They thought I'd stay passive, stay silent. They underestimated the power of quiet determination. Each move I made was calculated, precise. I didn't lash out. I didn't sink to their level. I simply built my case, one careful step at a time. But as I worked, another truth settled into me, heavier than the legal jargon, sharper than the accusations. I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was fighting for identity, for the right to be more than the fragments they saw, for the right to reclaim who I was, not as a soldier, not as a title, but as a person, as a mother. The cracks in the mirror, they didn't scare me anymore. They steadied me. Because once something breaks, you stop being afraid of breaking again. I looked through those fractures, looked at my own reflection, and for the first time in months, I saw something beyond the damage. I saw resolve. That night before I turned out the light, I whispered to the empty room, "You don't have to be unbroken to be unshakable." The mirror caught the words, held them in the glass, and I knew deep in my bones that no matter what came next, I was done standing still. The quiet was over. There's a saying in the army, the threat you don't see is the one that takes you down. I used to think that applied to battlefields. I never imagined it would apply to my own home. The first time I heard her name, I barely paid attention. Melissa, Brian's new girlfriend. The one who had been so supportive during his custody petition. The one my mother called sweet, my sister called steady. I barely registered it. I had bigger fights to face. But one afternoon, quiet, unremarkable, I received a message. Anonymous, no name, no greeting, just a single line. "You should check her record, for Noah's sake." At first I dismissed it. Anonymous tips were dangerous. I didn't want to become paranoid to fall into the same kind of manipulation they used against me. But something lingered. Something pulled at the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't reach. So I looked. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe something petty. What I didn't expect was the file. Sealed in another state under a different last name, Melissa's name, before she changed it. A history of child welfare investigations. One confirmed case of neglect. Another of suspected physical abuse. Both years old, both buried. I sat there staring at the screen for what felt like hours. My hands were steady, my breath shallow, and I felt the cold clarity settle in. This wasn't just about me. This wasn't just about betrayal or resentment. This was about Noah, about his safety, his future. And I had almost missed it, because I trusted what I wanted to believe, because I ignored the signs. And the signs, they had been there. The memory struck without warning. I saw her again, Melissa, clear as day, standing in my driveway the first time Brian brought her around. Her smile too wide, her eyes not quite meeting mine. The way her hand gripped Noah's shoulder a little too tight when he squirmed. The way she corrected him sharply when he spoke out of turn. At the time, I brushed it off, told myself I was imagining it, that I was projecting, that I was the one out of place, but I wasn't. I see that now. Hindsight is cruel that way. It doesn't just show you what you missed, it forces you to live with the knowledge that you let it happen. I remember another moment, Noah's birthday. Melissa had baked a cake. I can still hear her voice sugary sweet on the surface, but edged with something brittle when Noah accidentally spilled juice on the table. Her fingers dug into his arm just a fraction too hard as she guided him to clean it. I had frozen, second-guessed, dismissed my own instincts. And that was the real mistake, because I knew better. I had trained soldiers to trust their instincts in combat zones. I had told young recruits if something feels wrong, it probably is. But I hadn't followed my own advice when it mattered most. I thought about the anonymous message again. Who had sent it? How did they know I didn't have answers? I didn't need them. The truth was enough. I printed the documents, carefully, quietly. I added them to the growing file on my dining table next to the court papers, the character statements, the letters I'd started writing to Noah but never sent. The pieces were falling into place. But this time, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't on the defensive. I was moving first. Because there's something that happens when you finally pull back the curtain. When you stop letting fear cloud your judgment, you see. Not just what's in front of you, but what's been there all along. And I saw it now so clearly, it almost took my breath away. Brian wasn't just fighting for control. He was building something on a foundation of rot. And the people I loved, my son, were standing on top of it. I closed the file, folded my hands, and for the first time in weeks I felt still. I whispered, barely audible, "Not on my watch." The mirror in the hallway caught my reflection as I passed. The cracks still there, but my eyes, they were steady, the curtain was gone, and I was ready. They say that distance isn't measured in miles, it's measured in moments. And somewhere along the line, somewhere between deployments and promotions, courtrooms, and silence, I realized I had let the distance grow too wide between me and my own son. Noah. The name still feels soft when I say it out loud. It doesn't sound like a battlefield. It sounds like home. But somehow, somewhere, I lost him, not in the physical sense, but in the quiet ways that matter most. I saw it in his eyes. The way he flinched when I raised my voice just slightly over something as small as spilled milk. The way he hesitated before hugging me like he wasn't sure if the version of me standing in front of him was the same one he remembered from before. The realization came slow. It wasn't a crashing wave. It was a drip. A steady, painful drip that ate away at me until I couldn't look away anymore. I had been present. I had provided. I had protected. But I hadn't been there. Not fully. Not in the way he needed. I sat at the dining table that night, papers spread around me, evidence files, legal documents, photos. And right in the middle of the chaos, I placed a blank sheet of paper. I don't know what made me reach for the pen. But once I did, my hand didn't stop. I started writing, "Dear Noah." The pen felt foreign in my fingers. The ink stuttered as it met the paper, the letters shaky, uneven. My handwriting, a soldier's handwriting, never built for softness, never built for this. I told him the things I never said out loud, that I missed him, that I thought about him every single day no matter where I was, that every sunrise over desert sands, every quiet moment in the dead of night, every medal they pinned to my chest, I carried him with me. I told him that I was sorry, not for being a soldier, but for not always knowing how to be both soldier and mother. I paused the pen trembling between my fingers. And then I wrote the hardest line of all. I don't expect you to understand now, but I hope one day you will. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I hadn't cried in years, not like this, not in a way that made my chest ache and my throat burn. I set the pen down, stared at the letter, hands trembling. It was the first real thing I'd written in months, the first real thing I'd said, maybe in years. The house was silent around me. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and I sat there adrift holding onto a thread I didn't even know I'd let slip. I thought back to when Noah was little, how he used to press his small hands against my cheeks, pulling my face close, giggling uncontrollably. How he would fall asleep in my lap no matter how late I came home. I had believed the bond between us was unbreakable, that love once built was permanent, but I was wrong. Love isn't a fortress, it's a thread, delicate, fragile. And if you don't tend to it, if you don't hold it carefully, it frays. I hadn't meant to let it fray, but I had. And now, I was the one who had to stitch it back together. The letter sat there unfinished. But I folded it gently, slipped it into an envelope, wrote his name on the front in careful, deliberate script. I didn't know when I'd give it to him. Maybe in a week, maybe in a year, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. It was time to stop pretending the damage wasn't there. I reached for the photo on the mantel, the same one of us at the park, him on my shoulders. Both of us laughing without a care in the world. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe I could find that again. Not by erasing the past, but by writing a new story forward. One letter, one truth, one fragile human moment at a time. There's a moment right before the blade sinks in when time seems to freeze. When you know what's coming, when you feel the weight of it before it lands. I felt that moment more times than I can count on the battlefield. But nothing prepared me for what it feels like when the knife doesn't come from the front, when it comes from behind, from the people you once trusted to guard your back. The betrayals weren't new by then. They had stacked on top of each other like bricks. The divorce, the custody fight, the lies, the twisted half-truths whispered in courtrooms and dining rooms and behind doors I was no longer invited to open. But somehow, when the final betrayal came, it still stole my breath. I found out through a neighbor, a quiet woman, retired nurse, the kind who bakes cookies for block parties and remembers everyone's birthday. She didn't mean to tell me. It slipped out casually, innocent words spoken over the fence while we both watered the flowers. "Melissa's moving in with Brian full-time," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Seems so soon considering. But I guess some people just move on fast." I stood there, garden hose in one hand, dirt on my palms, and I felt the air shift. Noah. She wasn't just visiting anymore. She was moving in. She was stepping into the space I used to call home. She was stepping into my son's world. The woman smiled politely, unaware of the storm that had just broken loose inside me. I nodded. Thanked her, finished watering the plants. I didn't let it show, not then, not ever. But the moment I stepped back inside my house, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I dropped to the edge of the couch, hands gripping my knees so tightly my fingers ached. Breathe, slow, steady. I looked down and saw it, my hands clenched into fists. The white of my knuckles, the tremble in my fingertips. I uncurled them one finger at a time. The old training kicked in automatically. Ground yourself. Control your breath. Command your body before it commands you. I dropped my gaze to the floor. The scuffed toes of my boots, standard military issue, worn but solid, caught the afternoon light. They grounded me, reminded me. I wasn't fragile, I wasn't broken, I was forged. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs, felt the roughness of fabric under my skin, and I let the air move through me, slow and deliberate. The betrayal was real, but so was my resilience. Brian could move her in. He could fill the house with new laughter, new lies, new distractions. But he couldn't erase me. He couldn't erase the years I'd carried that family. He couldn't erase the nights I spent overseas clutching Noah's photo. He couldn't erase the battles I fought in foreign lands and in my own heart to build the life they so casually discarded. I stood slowly, deliberately, every movement precise, every breath measured. The mirror in the hallway caught my reflection again, cracked but steady. I touched the glass fingertips resting against the fracture. "You don't break," I whispered. "Not like this." The phone rang somewhere behind me. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat at the table where my file lay open and began adding to it. The dates, the times, the details. Each fact sharpened like a blade. I wasn't reacting. I wasn't lashing out. I was preparing. Because that's what you do when the knife sinks deeper. You don't collapse. You don't fall. You plant your feet. You steady your breath. And you keep moving. I glanced down at my boots again, solid on the worn wooden floor. I felt the weight of my own pulse slowing. And I remembered the words they taught us in the field: hold the line. That's what I intended to do. No matter how deep the knife, no matter how cruel the twist, I would hold the line. For Noah, for myself, for the woman staring back at me through the fractured glass, still standing, always standing. Forgiveness is a word people throw around too easily, as if it's something you can just hand out like candy, as if it's simple, as if it's small. But it's not. It never has been. I used to think forgiveness was about other people, that it was something you gave to those who wronged you, a gift, a concession. But I was wrong. I see that now. The first person I needed to forgive was myself. It didn't come all at once. There was no grand epiphany. Just a quiet moment, barely noticeable, when the weight of everything I had carried started pressing too hard on my chest, and I realized I was the one holding it there. I sat alone in my living room that night, papers still scattered across the table, Noah's letter unopened beside me. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the heater, and for the first time in months, I let the exhaustion catch up to me. I thought about the choices I made, the time I missed, the calls I didn't return, the moments I told myself didn't matter because duty came first. I thought about Noah's eyes, how they'd changed, how somewhere along the way I'd stopped being the safe place he could run to. And the guilt. The guilt was a living thing inside me, sharp, heavy, merciless. I had been so focused on the betrayals from others, so consumed by their lies, their cruelty, their abandonment, that I hadn't stopped to look at the reflection that hurt me most. Mine. I saw it then so clearly, it almost knocked the breath from my lungs. I had been punishing myself for years, not just for this custody battle, not just for this divorce, but for every time I had chosen the mission over the moment, the flag over the family, the call over the cradle. I told myself I didn't have a choice, that I was serving a greater good, that Noah would understand one day. But the truth is, I didn't give him the chance to understand, because I never let him see the full me. The soldier, yes, the protector, always. But the mother, the human, the flawed. Scared, messy woman beneath the uniform. No. I closed my eyes, hands resting on the envelope in front of me. I could feel the texture of the paper under my fingertips, the weight of the unsaid. And for the first time, I whispered it aloud, words I had never allowed myself to speak. I'm sorry. It wasn't for Brian. It wasn't for my mother. It wasn't for my sister. It was for me. For the girl I used to be. For the woman I had become. For the mother I still had the chance to be. I think sometimes we carry so much armor that we forget how to put it down. We forget that strength isn't just standing tall when the world burns. Sometimes strength is sitting still and admitting you hurt. I let the words settle, let the guilt rise, let the shame wash over me, and then I let it go. Not all of it, not forever, but enough to breathe again. Enough to soften the edge that had hardened me for too long. I opened the letter to Noah, added one more line at the bottom, hands still unsteady but voice clear in my head. I don't need you to be perfect, and I hope one day you'll forgive me for not being perfect either. I folded the letter, placed it gently back in the envelope, and this time something shifted inside me. Not closure, not yet, but the beginning of it. I stood feet solid on the floor, hands relaxed at my sides, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't drowning. I was still standing, bruised, fractured, but standing, and somewhere deep in my chest, I felt it. The first breath of forgiveness, not for them, for me. Some people say courtrooms are sterile places, neutral, cold, just wood and glass and order. They're wrong. Courtrooms are battlefields. I felt it the moment I stepped out of the car, heels clicking softly on the concrete, breath misting in the sharp morning air. My heart was steady, my hands relaxed, but every step I took toward those courthouse doors felt heavier than the last. I wasn't wearing civilian clothes, not this time. I wore the uniform, full dress, 4 stars polished to a mirror's shine across my shoulders, ribbons, medals, insignias. The story of my life stitched into every line, every fold, every gleam of brass. I walked slowly, deliberately, each footfall echoing like a heartbeat in my ears. Step, step, step. I kept my gaze forward, but I could feel the weight of eyes turning toward me. Security guards stiffened as I passed. Onlookers whispered. Reporters, quiet for now, shifted uneasily on the courthouse steps. They didn't need to speak. The silence said everything. By the time I reached the courtroom doors, I could hear my own breath slow and measured the way they taught us before combat. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I stepped inside, and the world stopped. The air was thick, heavy with the unsaid. Rows of polished benches stretched out on either side. Familiar faces, unfamiliar faces. Brian, my mother, my sister, all seated, all waiting. But when I entered, something shifted. A ripple, a hush. The judge, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, stood. He didn't have to. Protocol didn't require it. But he stood. And in that moment, I felt the weight of every moment that had brought me here. The battlefields, the homecomings, the distance, the cracks, the betrayals. All of it converged in the quiet stillness of that room. I could feel my heart beating slow and deep in my chest. Not from fear, not from anger, but from something older, something steadier, resolve. I walked to my seat, heels soft against the tile, the subtle shift of my uniform catching the light. I didn't look at Brian. I didn't look at my mother. I kept my eyes forward, head high, spine straight. But I felt them. I felt every glance, the way their bodies stiffened, the way their eyes darted away when I passed. They had written me off. They had reduced me to whispers, to headlines, to courtroom gossip. But now they saw. Not the version of me they built, not the caricature they painted. They saw me. I took my place at the plaintiff's table, hands resting lightly on the polished wood. The attorney beside me murmured something, soft words I barely registered. Because my focus wasn't on him. It wasn't on the legal strategy, or the press, or the weight of the court. It was on Noah. Always on Noah. I closed my eyes for the briefest second, let his face rise in my mind, his laugh. His eyes, the way he used to reach for my hand without hesitation. And when I opened them again, my breath was steady. I adjusted my sleeves, felt the cool weight of my metals shift against the fabric, and I let the stillness settle into my bones. This wasn't just a legal battle. It wasn't just about custody. It was about who I was, who I refused to stop being. And I knew without doubt that whatever came next, I would face it the way I had faced everything else in my life. one step at a time, one breath at a time. I flexed my fingers, once felt the tension release, and kept them flat against the table. The rhythm of my heartbeat slowed, even calm. Breathe in, breathe out. The judge sat back down. The room exhaled. The hearing began. And I was ready. The thing about truth is, it doesn't need volume. It doesn't need rage. It just needs space to be seen. And that's what I gave it. The courtroom settled into a heavy stillness as my attorney rose, papers in hand, voice calm but steady. Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to introduce Exhibit C, video evidence submitted by the plaintiff. I sat motionless as the television screen was wheeled into place. The remote passed from hand to hand until the judge gave a simple nod. Proceed. I felt the weight of every eye in the room shift toward the screen. And then it began. The grainy footage flickered to life. First, my own dashboard camera angled just right to catch the blinding sweep of police lights in the rearview mirror. Then the sound, distant at first, of the officer's voice. I heard my own voice too, level, calm, asking questions, complying. And then the escalation, the tone shift, the aggression. The way his hand hovered near his weapon, the way he leaned in just a little too close. The room stayed silent. No fidgeting, no coughs, no whispers. Only the soft hum of the video playing, the sound of tires on pavement, the flat echo of words I had lived but almost forgotten the shape of. Then came the second angle, body cam footage. Sharper, colder, more intimate. The jury leaned in, unconsciously pulled forward by the magnetic pull of something undeniable. They saw it. The officer's impatience. The unnecessary field test. The dismissive attitude when I passed it without flaw. And then the ticket slipped into my hand like an afterthought. A punishment not for what I did, but for who I was. I watched it all unfold again, but this time through the eyes of strangers. I felt strangely detached, as if the woman on the screen wasn't me at all. Just a figure, a stand-in for every person who had ever been quietly reduced, quietly dismissed. And then it ended. The screen went dark. The room stayed frozen. I didn't look at Brian. I didn't look at my mother. I kept my hands folded neatly in front of me, my breath steady, my heart calm. Because this moment wasn't about them anymore. It wasn't even about me. It was about truth. And truth, I had learned, has a weight all its own. The judge cleared his throat softly. My attorney didn't rush the next question. He let the silence stretch just long enough for the images to burn into memory. Lieutenant General Cole, he said finally. Voice low but clear. Were you at any point during that stop non-compliant? I answered without hesitation. No. Did you raise your voice? Threaten the officer in any way? No. Did you at any point fail to identify yourself as a federal employee operating a government vehicle? I kept my tone level. No, I informed him immediately. The attorney nodded, turned to the jury. And in that moment, I saw it, the shift. Not just in their eyes, in the room, the weight of the footage, the weight of what had been undeniable, what could no longer be twisted or reshaped by whispered lies or courtroom spin. I glanced at the judge. He held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and shifted his focus back to the papers in front of him. I let my breath out slow. This wasn't victory, not yet, but it was truth. And sometimes that's the first step. I thought of Noah, his face rising unbidden behind my eyes. I thought of the promises I hadn't spoken aloud. And in that stillness, I let the moment settle into me. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight dirty. The truth, bare, simple, quiet, was enough. And as I sat back, hands resting lightly on the table, I whispered silently to myself, you held the line. And you're still standing. Some moments don't need sound. They don't need applause, or outrage, or words. They just need silence. The kind of silence that says everything. I felt it the second the judge rose from his seat. The room had already been still frozen since the last echoes of the video faded. But when he stood, something deeper settled over us. A stillness that pressed against my ribs, that made the air too thick to swallow. I kept my hands flat on the table. I didn't shift, didn't blink. I just watched as he adjusted his robe, cleared his throat, and let the weight of the moment stretch. After careful review, he began, voice steady but heavy. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Lieutenant General Adrian Cole. I heard the words. But it was the silence after that landed hardest. The sound of breath catching across the aisle. The almost imperceptible rustle of fabric as Brian stiffened in his seat. The crack in my sister's composure as her hands twisted nervously together. I didn't look at them directly, but I felt them. The judge's voice continued, laying out the findings: unlawful detainment, abuse of authority, intimidation without cause. Every syllable dropped like a stone in water ripples, spreading in waves I knew would reach far beyond this room. And then, the final words: "This decision will remain on permanent record," the judge said. "It will be forwarded for departmental review. Furthermore, the plaintiff retains primary custody with visitation granted at the court's discretion." It was done. No shouts, no declarations. Just the quiet click of the gavel and the low hum of consequence settling into place. I kept my breath steady, even, unshaken. But across the room I saw him. Brian. The first crack was in his eyes, barely visible, but I knew it when I saw it. Denial. A shake of the head, a furrowed brow, that subtle twitch of the mouth as his mind scrambled for a way to rewrite what he'd just heard. Then the second crack, panic, the widening of the eyes, the sharp intake of breath. I watched his hands clench into fists against the table's edge, white-knuckled, rigid. His lawyer leaned in, whispered something fast, but he barely seemed to hear. And then, collapse. His shoulders dropped. The fight left his posture. The weight of it finally landed. For a moment I thought that was the end, that he would stay there, small, broken, silent. But then came the final shift, the last piece of the fall: remorse. It flickered barely there, just a soft wetness in the corners of his eyes, a tightening of the jaw, a breath too sharp to control. For the first time since this began, Brian looked at me, really looked. And in that single glance, I saw it all: the fear, the regret, the tiny flickering ember of a man who realized too late what he had destroyed. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I held his gaze, not with victory, not with vengeance, but with something quieter, something closer to pity. The judge sat back down, his voice barely above a whisper now, as he dismissed the court. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Whispers rose and fell like distant thunder. Reporters began scribbling notes, but the cameras kept outside would never capture the only moment that truly mattered: the stillness. The raw, unguarded silence of a man undone not by force, but by truth. I rose. My boots made no sound on the polished floor. My breath was steady, my hands calm. As I stepped past him, past Brian, past my mother, past the sister who still refused to meet my eyes, I felt something shift deep in my chest. Not anger, not triumph, just release. I heard him murmur something, a breathless, broken apology that barely reached the air between us. But I didn't stop. I didn't turn back. Some doors once closed are not meant to reopen. Outside, the wind caught the flag at the courthouse steps, made it ripple in the afternoon sun. I paused, lifted my chin, let the quiet settle in my bones. And in that silence, deeper than any courtroom, louder than any victory, I found what I didn't even know I'd been searching for: peace. Not every ending needs words. Some endings, they arrive in silence. And somehow, those are the ones that stay with you the longest. I didn't speak when I stepped out of the courthouse that afternoon. I didn't look back, didn't reach for applause, didn't try to fill the air with explanations or justifications. I just walked. The wind caught at the edges of my uniform, tugged gently at the loose strands of hair that had slipped free from the careful knot at the back of my neck. The sky stretched endless and blue above me, clean, clear, unbothered. And for the first time in what felt like years, so was I. Noah was waiting on the steps. He stood, small shoulders, hunched hands buried deep in the pockets of his coat. His eyes, those same wide, searching eyes he had when he was 5, found mine the moment I stepped outside. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Because how do you explain to a child that some battles can't be seen? That some wars don't leave visible scars, but they cut just as deep? I stopped a few feet away, hands still at my sides. I didn't reach for him. I let the moment breathe. And then quietly, without a word, he closed the distance. He reached for my hand, fingers small but certain wrapping tightly around mine. I felt the warmth of his palm seep into my skin, felt the unspoken weight of everything he couldn't find the words for, and I held on. I didn't speak, didn't break the stillness, because some silences are sacred, some silences heal. I remembered in that moment every time I had missed this, every time the uniform came first, every time the phone call had ended too soon or the flight home had arrived too late. I remembered the sound of his laughter from years before, so vivid in my memory it almost hurt. I remembered the feel of his head against my shoulder after nightmares, the softness of his breath against my neck when he slept. And for the first time, I let the grief of those missed moments wash over me without turning away. I let it rise, I let it settle, and then I let it go. Noah didn't speak either, he just squeezed my hand tighter. We stood like that for what felt like forever, two people caught between what was and what could still be. The courthouse doors clattered softly behind us as people filtered out. The low murmur of voices drifted on the breeze, but none of it touched us. It was just him and me. And the quiet. I felt the smallest breath of relief press against the edge of my heart, fragile but real. The kind of relief that doesn't come from victory. The kind that comes from survival. From standing in the wreckage and still having something left to hold on to. Eventually, Noah tilted his head up, eyes meeting mine. And for the first time in too long, I saw trust there. Not full, not complete, but enough. Enough to start again. I gave his hand the gentlest squeeze in return. Still no words. None needed. Some wounds don't close with apologies. They close with presence, with time, with the quiet act of staying when everything else has fallen apart. We began to walk, no destination, no urgency. Just two sets of footsteps on the courthouse steps, the soft rhythm of breath and the warmth of shared silence. And as we moved forward, hand in hand, hearts still raw but somehow lighter, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe until then. Some battles aren't meant to be won. Some are meant to be endured. And sometimes, the only victory is that you're still standing to see the sunrise. I looked down at Noah. He looked straight ahead. And we kept walking. Together. Some stories don't end with fireworks. They end in the quiet. 2 weeks after the verdict, I found myself sitting on a park bench, not in uniform, not in court, just me. Noah sat beside me, a half-melted ice cream cone in his hand, his legs swinging back and forth beneath the bench. The breeze was soft, the sun warm, but not harsh. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the weight I'd carried for so long was lighter. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. I watched him laugh at the way his ice cream dripped down his fingers, his nose scrunching up in that same way he used to when he was 5. It struck me then how much time I had lost, how much life I had let pass in the name of battles I thought I had to fight alone. But this moment, this small, ordinary moment, felt more powerful than any battlefield I'd ever stood on. I wasn't General Cole here. I wasn't the soldier. I wasn't the headline. I was just Mom. No medals, no rank, no war, just us. Noah nudged me at one point, eyes shining in the afternoon light, and offered me a bite of his ice cream. I laughed, genuine, unforced, and I took it. The sweetness of vanilla and the sound of his giggle filled the air around us, soft and light. I let the breeze wash over me, closing my eyes for a second. And somewhere deep in my chest, past the scars, past the walls, I felt it. Peace. Not because the world was fixed. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was still here, because we were still here. When I opened my eyes again, I looked at him, really looked. And I whispered soft enough that only I could hear. They said, I failed. The words didn't sting the way they once did. They held no weight, no power. I smiled gently, my voice barely audible against the rustling leaves. Maybe I did, but I got back up. And I'll keep getting back up. Noah didn't hear me. He didn't need to. I wasn't saying it for him. I was saying it for me. We sat there until the sun dipped low, until the shadows stretched long across the grass, and the breeze carried the scent of autumn. And when we finally stood to leave, I held his hand, not tight, not forced. Just enough. And together, we walked forward. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to this channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Thank you for spending your time here with us today. Wherever you are, whatever season you're standing in, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock loudly. Sometimes it waits quietly, patiently, until you're ready to open the door. Take care of yourself. Be gentle with your heart. And I'll see you in the next story. 1. Description: revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, calculated, and dressed in a military uniform. In this powerful, true-to-life revenge story, Lieutenant General Adrienne Cole faces the ultimate betrayal. Her own family tries to take her son away, believing she's too broken by war to be a mother. But when Adrienne walks into court in full military dress, her 4-star rank leaves the room speechless. If you love military revenge stories, courtroom drama, and emotional underdog victories, this story will keep you hooked until the very end. Witness how Adrienne, battle-hardened, resilient, and deeply human, fights, not just for justice, but for the right to be seen and loved as she is. Will quiet strength be enough to dismantle years of betrayal? Click play now, because some revenges don't come with noise. They come with dignity. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. Revenge Dismantled 2. Pinned comment. What did you think of Adrienne's story? Rate it from 0 to 10. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, and let's build a global community that believes in kindness, resilience, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your friends. Your support brings us closer to our 1K subscriber milestone and inspires us to keep creating more powerful love and revenge stories. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for reminding us all, sometimes quiet courage changes everything.